Hal Sparks radio program, mega worldwide.
I've had people walk out of me before, but not when I was being so charming.
Video streaming at halsparks.com.
I don't care for you if the putrid sludge you're troweling out.
Damn puss-faced little pimpstick.
True progressive talk.
Might be a good time for you guys to give up.
Welcome back to the show. It's the Hal Sparks radio program, mega worldwide, now with 100% more Johnny Million and Philip Ittner, and we're live streaming at infotainmentwars.com and on twitch.tv/Hal Sparks, where you should subscribe and help us out and help us grow the show, because you just should, because there are no angel investors on the left. There just aren't. And so we're on our own, so help us out. So meanwhile, speaking of angels, Philip, thanks for joining us again. First of all, how you doing? Out of the gate, we've got a bunch of questions lined up, but that's the first one for me.
I'm good. I mean, I got a little sinus headache going on, but aside from that, I'm all right. I'm fine.
Mm-hmm.
Could be worse.
Send you some I think it's Linghua Qingwen, the Chinese COVID medicine. Yeah, or some ivermectin.
Oh, no.
Yeah. It's so fun. The new ivermectin comes in a little plastic horse, and you move its tail. Never mind. Anyways, it's kind of gross. So, welcome. We have a lot of questions from the chat.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but right away, I wanted to talk about the fact, and I think the biggest move this week, the biggest from the United States standpoint, is Blinken coming out. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken coming out and declaring the Wagner Group. The United States has declared the Wagner Group a criminal enterprise, not a terrorist organization, but an international criminal enterprise, which brings in a whole lot of tools in terms of dealing with their funding that are more precise even than terrorism, which would require direct sanctions against countries for funding them. It's more like, nah, we're just going to assume you don't know how bad they are, countries, and we're going to stop, it'll be banking that we're going after, not nation states.
Interpol, it'll open up things for Interpol to do. It'll open up things for our FBI to do. That's a big deal. That's a big deal. And it's correct. The Wagner Group is a criminal enterprise. It clearly is. Yeah. I mean, the fact that they draw from Russian prisons for many of their soldiers is
it's kind of a telltale sign.
What more evidence do you need?
Sure.
That's kind of a giveaway.
Right.
There's that. There's Rammstein, which didn't go exactly how we'd hoped.
Too harsh.
Not the band.
Not the band. The summit, the Defense Secretary Summit. Austin was on this side of the pond. Came a few days early. I suspect he gave a little dressing down to the Germans, but it didn't seem to work out. We've had a visit today by a bunch of senators. Lindsey Graham was here with two others.
He's one of the few. On the Republican side who's, all in.
Who still supports. And there's plenty to talk about. So whatever topic you'd like to dive into, I'm happy to do it, or we can take questions from the audience, or whatever you want to do.
Cool. Well, let's grab one, since we usually get caught behind the 8-ball in the middle of the show trying to make up for them. Let's grab them right away, because we do have a couple that we were addressing before that I wanted to get. Johnny?
Yeah, so I've got a question from Daphne Farmer. When will they stop talking about sending tanks to Ukraine and actually begin sending them? Give them the power that they need to take the Eastern battles. Glory to Ukraine.
Yeah. Well, they're going to get Challengers. They're going to get the Challenger 2 from the Brits. They're going to get about a squadron of them, which I know doesn't sound like an impressive amount of tanks, but a modern NATO battle tank, when put up against a Soviet or a Russian tank, is a pretty advantageous for the Ukrainians on that side of the equation. If you look at the history of there's a famous battle in the Persian Gulf War called 73 Easting, and a squadron, much like the squadron of the Challengers, took out an entire division of Iraqi Soviet-made tanks. So no small thing there. But the Leopard 2 is what everybody really wants, because there's a huge stockpile of them on the continent. And there are about 2,000 Leopards on the in Europe. The Finns have them, I believe. The Poles certainly have them, and that's worth discussing. They're all over the place. Cyprus has some, I believe. The Germans have said that they're not willing to send the Leopard, and because they have end contract, end of use, contracts where we basically we'll sell you these Leopards, but we get to decide if you send them anywhere, and they're not letting anybody else send their Leopards. So that's been a big problem. The Poles are really ticked off about it, and they're saying we might just send our Leopards, no matter what Berlin has to say about it. But the Germans have said we don't want to send our Leopards. We don't want to let anybody else send Leopards until the U.S. sends Abrams. It's a bit of a spurious argument, but if that's where they want to plant their feet and dig in, then there is a growing contingent of people saying, okay, just send an Abrams, then literally one, or send 10, something like that. The problem with the Abrams is a very sophisticated tank system. It's built around a jet engine, so it not only does it run on jet fuel, which is different than every other NATO battle tank, but because it's built around this jet engine, maintenance and upkeep are completely different from what you would have to do with any other main battle tank. Everything else is diesel, so would you take down to the Jiffy Lube, your Cessna? No, you would not. So, but if symbolically America has to send a couple of Abrams, there's talk. There are those advocating just send a couple of Abrams. Just park them in Lviv.
Yeah. The other thing too is
let Berlin has save face.
Put them in Poland,
or whatever
let them
Berlin
train
needs.
them on them for a period of time, and know that because they are that different, allow them to train on them. Whether they end up being in the battle zone or not is sort of immaterial in that regard. That said, in the same kind of
if that's what Schultz in Germany, if that's what Berlin needs, then fine. Whatever Berlin needs to let loose the Leopard 2, I myself am of the mind that maybe we should, whatever you need. I don't know why they're being.
Yeah.
I have my suspicions and my concerns, but
well, largely because they know it's a red line, so they're taking advantage of an already existing red line for no particular purpose. That's the easiest answer. I think that's. I'm
hoping that of all the options out there, I'm hoping that's the concern that the Germans have, because Germany's history in Ukraine is not great. Yeah. I don't know, but look, the head of the army here, General Zaluzhny, has asked for 300 main battle tanks. That's a big ask.
Yeah.
But it's not impossible. It could be done. There's 2,000 Leopards on the continent. We have Abrams all over the place. I think like the UAE has like 1,100 Abrams. It's crazy. So, but look, we need to send them more armor. Absolutely. I agree 100%.
From the just so you know, just to catch people up too, from the agreement this week, Canada is sending 200 personnel carriers. Sweden is sending, I think, its largest, to date.
Yeah, that's a great system.
Artillery systems and armored vehicles, and Britain is donating 600 missiles, the U.S. we're sending 100 additional fighting vehicles. As well, beyond whether or not tanks come. There's still a lot going there, and another support package came through. By the way, all of these already signed off on last year. They just have to be adjudicated by once the stuff is ready. Show me the list. That's the list we agreed on. That's what's getting sent, signed, and gone. So every time somebody goes, we're sending another $1.8 billion worth of stuff, it's from the 40 that was agreed on last year. We're not even at the point where they're spending the 48 that was in the 2023 budget. That's not that won't come on. That stuff won't come online till April. The rest of they can rush it, and the Biden administration won't drag their feet. But they're still implementing the stuff that's going now. And that's not even involving the lend-lease in terms of that amount. So let's grab an, hold on, let me see what time. Yeah, well, let's take a break real quick, and then we'll come back with more questions from the chat, infotainmentwars.com, and of course, twitch.tv/AlSparks. Fwank.com will take you there, FWANQ.com. Maybe twitch.tv.
I always forget about the Q.
Easier. It's, I mean, how do you forget about the Q? We'll be back right after this.
How could I?
How could you?
Attention, attention, stop what you're doing. Because we're coming back to the Hal Sparks radio program, Mega Worldwide.
They went a little crazy with it, and I appreciate it.
Now let's get back with Hal Sparks radio program, Mega Worldwide.
So the Azov regiment, which was the big allegedly Nazi regiment that everybody was clamoring about for a long time, because there were like 9 neo-Nazis in 2014. By the way, when Russia still ran the place under Yanukovych, by the way, and was feeding these people in from Russia itself, don't get me started, and got broomed out by early. And in many ways, by the movement that ultimately elected a Jewish president.
Clashes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, they had street clashes. They had street clashes between the authorities, the government authorities, and the Azov guys. And after that, they said, nope, clean it up. So. Yep.
And then and so currently now the U.S. has stopped recognizing the Azov Regiment as a terrorist organization or a neo-Nazi organization. It does not meet the criteria for a dangerous organization, which is the standard on Facebook, Instagram, and Meta, and other sites. I don't know whether there's a standard on Twitter anymore at all, so it kind of doesn't matter. But that allows them to have accounts on Facebook and that kind of stuff. Meanwhile, the Wagner Group has, at the same time, was classified as an international criminal organization, and they lose their ability to just kind of stand around like they're a normal member of the public online, which was a major shift this week. And again, along with that, Anthony Blinken showing video of North Korean arms being given to the Russians at their border, posting that video in his press conference. And we all like post yellow cake and all that kind of stuff. We always take that kind of stuff with a grain of salt, but the only people denying it are North Korea themselves, which is, not exactly a source of, an honest player on the field. I suppose Trump would run to their defense as well. So that's, with friends like those. Let's grab another question from the chat, if we may.
Sure.
Johnny.
Yeah, I've got one from Jordan Mills. This was a super chat. Thank you, Jordan. Have you heard about Russia moving ICBMs to Belarus and the Donbas without the nuclear warheads to fire at Ukrainian cities, to eat up their air defense systems and use as kinetic weapons?
I have heard about that. Yeah. As a matter of fact, we had that. We had one hit us here. As a matter of fact, one that was nuclear capable, but they had the warhead taken off. I mean, it's just, I don't know if it's trying to chew up Ukrainian air defense, because we're constantly getting new air defense systems in. So I don't know if that's the reason, or if the on the other end of the spectrum is perhaps they're running out of missiles. The Russians are, it's been pretty solidly reported, are having a serious problem with their backlog of missiles. So it might be that as well. But it's too early to say. It's disturbing in the least, not to say, not in the least, that they're sending nuclear capable missiles at us. But it's also an indication of their desperation. And they're all they do is take out apartment blocks. They're just big, dumb, dumb weapons that they're just chucking at us. So I'm not overly concerned about them.
And I do think it's like, take it as this. Imagine taking your best, most powerful weapon, gutting it, and filling it with laundry and firing it at something just to make a big boom.
Yeah.
Is essentially it. And that's
there was a follow-up
doing
comment in here
Yeah.
where someone was asking they don't know what yellow cake is.
Oh, yellow cake is what is what they make weaponizable uranium out of. Is the idea is that that's a precursor to having a nuclear weapon. And so if you find traces of that, more than likely they are either moving towards having a nuke or having a nuke, which is what the whole Colin Powell yellow cake UN thing was during the beginning of the Iraq War about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, which, by the way, didn't end up being nukes, which is the weird part, was just leftover chemical munitions that Iran and Iraq were both using on each other, which, by the way, neither feared using at that point, as long as they weren't caught, and were sold to them by both sides by Donald Rumsfeld. It's one of the reasons why, he was running the company that sold that stuff, well before. Talk about, everybody talks about the U.S. military-industrial complex, when in reality, it was the free floaters, like the ones that Rumsfeld was running, that actually had the impact on the world. They just sell to the highest bidder. And that's what, both sides were using the same chemical munitions on each other. And the idea that, that was where the Bill Hicks joke came from, Iraq, incredible weapons. Incredible weapons. How do we know? We looked at the receipt. Okay, that's specifically, he made it about the U.S. government in general, but it was specifically a Donald Rumsfeld joke in that regard, who went to our high school, Johnny, and who I and some other alumni stopped the effort to put a bust of him in front of the school. Just saying. I'm glad we were successful in that. Yeah, we all railed against it, and it didn't happen. That said, let's see. What are we doing? Yeah, we're good on time. Let's grab another question.
Okay. This is a question from last week, but we had the problems with the connection from Berkeley Dowd. How concerned are Ukrainians about the House Republicans preventing the U.S. from sending financial and military aid?
Not very. They're pretty savvy here about how things work in the United States, and they know that by the time if the House tries to obstruct weapons and money being sent here, that there are a whole lot of ways that can be delayed or circumvented or waylaid or whatever. They're not terribly concerned about a Republican House. No.
Nice. And a quick one from Nick Rich 56. Does Phil have any drone cams?
Do I have any drone cams?
Yeah,
I do. I've got a drone that I took out with me to the Donbass. But the problem is using drones. If you're not part of the military, they really don't. They frown on it significantly. You kind of have to ask the commander in the region. I was out with a missile system, a bunch of guys with from a rocket brigade, and I asked if I could put up my drone, and the guy said, "No, we don't want you to do that, because if you connect to the satellites, they might be able to intercept it and triangulate and hit us." And I didn't want to really get into him with, but I can do it I can just do it as an RC radio controlled thing. I don't have to connect to satellites, but it just pick your battles, and that wasn't one of them that I was going to really get into it with him. But yes, I do have a drone.
By the way, real quick, so one of the other details that came out is that we were talking maybe 2 months ago, probably November, about the number of dead, the tracking the number of Russian dead, and using it seemed like Russia was using the number that was pre the conscript call up. And it was about 90,000. They seemed to kind of tailor out at about like it stopped, kind of like China's 4,000 dead, which, by the way, this week I heard the scariest number I have ever heard out of China, that the number of COVID dead to date may be as high as 300 million.
Jesus Christ.
Jeez.
17 million was the highest number I had heard previously. But there are entire districts that have lost 20 to 30% of their population. And if you extrapolate that over the entirety of a country that big, if it's anywhere close in that ballpark, that's what that number comes out to. It is horrifying, mostly in the rural areas, mostly where they don't care. But it's why, somebody was doing the calculation last week, and it's hard to argue with. 300, maybe it's split the difference. It's at 160, 180, but a horrifying number of people just from COVID.
It's still horrific.
It's horrific, yeah. But in the case of the dead, since the conscripts were pulled up, since the mobilization, the 300,000, the U.S. is now estimating that the Russians have lost 188,000 soldiers and military personnel.
188,000. It's crazy.
It's crazy. I forget, what did they lose in Afghanistan in 20 years? Like
in 10 years. Well, no, they were there
right.
they were 79. They were there 79 to 89.
Yeah.
And they've, I don't know exactly how many they lost.
14,000.
Yeah,
like
something
that.
like that. They've surpassed that in 1 year by a factor of
10
at least 5.
Yeah.
Somewhere at 5 or 10, somewhere
right.
in that ballpark.
188,000
for what?
Right. And by the way, and this is the initial group. This is the first stringers in a lot of ways. Now, whatever about Russia sending in cannon fodder and never caring, blah, blah, blah. But you certainly, if you think you're going to win, you're going to send the people in to do it. And if you think you're going to depopulate the place by screwing your way across the country and taking it like you're the Mongols, then which we discussed on my show last week, then you're going to send in your youngest, most fertile, and they're the first to die. So 188,000. They've lost 2,000 tanks by their count, and this is all geolocated satellite imagery. This isn't like bravado. If anything, they're only counting the ones you can see from the sky.
This is not a wild approximation. This is been pretty precisely determined.
They crunched the numbers multiple times. Yeah, it's a horrifying number of people dying.
Well, Russia conducts war in a very different way than the Western nations do because, well, for a variety of reasons, which you want to take a sociology degree in what Russia does and why it does it. It conducts war very differently than what we do, which is one of the reasons why, again, not to go back to this battle tank issue, but we do something called combined combat operations, which is basically we put our guys in infantry fighting vehicles, like we're going to send over the Bradley, we're going to send over the Stryker, so that they can keep up with the tanks, and you work in conjunction. You support one another in maneuver and all sorts of really kind of tactically sound doctrine.
Right.
The Russians military doctrine basically comes down to we're going to shoot a whole bunch of artillery at you, and then we're just going to overwhelm you with guys with AK-47s. We're just going to throw bodies at you, and it's deeply cynical, and it's a brutal form of warfare that it reveals a serious lack of putting importance on your soldiers' lives. It's very different from what we do. I just look at the two doctrines. We put our soldiers in armored vehicles because we don't want them going back in body bags, because we've got an electorate to answer to. The Russians can throw tens and tens of thousands of people, young men and soldiers, and have them just killed for nothing. And then they don't have to answer to their people because they can always violently put down any kind of uprising or protest movement. I mean, there was a story this week, and I think it broke after I spoke to you on Wednesday, Hal.
Right. Hold on. Let's hold that because we got to take a break.
Sure.
Because we're at the half hour, so
let's
we
take
went
a
a little
break.
bit over. It's a good hinge time. We'll be back right after this with more Philip Ittner. Follow Philip on Twitter at Philip Ittner, 1 L in Philip, 2 T's in Ittner. We'll be back right after this. It's the House Sparks Radio program, Mega Worldwide, now with 100% more. Johnny Million. We'll be back.
You're listening to Hal Sparks' radio program, Mega Worldwide.
I thought there was going to be like a new one every break. I was so excited.
You want more, Hal? We'll give you more. Hal Sparks' radio program, Mega Worldwide on Chicago's Progressive Talk, WCPT 820. Hoo-yah!
Yeah.
Well, welcome back. So, Philip was starting into, I believe, about the Wagner Mercs story, and I have a little aside as well too. But whatever. Yeah.
It goes into what I was talking about prior to the break about the kind of difference in military doctrine and how we in the West we prioritize keeping our soldiers alive because we have to answer to an electorate. The Russians don't necessarily have to do that. There's a Wagner soldier, mercenary, who escaped from Russia and sought asylum in Norway. And great story about how he got away, very harrowing thing. But he told stories about the Wagner group and how they, for example, treat their dead. So he reports that they're taking the dead, the Wagner guys are, and they are purposefully burying them in Ukraine and then saying to the families back in Russia, he has deserted or he is missing. We don't know if he's dead, because if he's KIA, if he's killed in action, they have to pay the families a different amount of money than if he's just missing or if he surrendered or something like that.
Jesus.
It's deeply cynical, and it's another example of the different mentality. We put our guys in armored fighting vehicles for a reason. We don't want them to die. And if you want to be really cynical about the whole thing, we don't want them to die because we don't want to lose the electorate. But either way, it's just the two sides conduct war in very different ways.
The fact that you have to show your electorate that you care about the soldiers says a lot anyways. Even if you're the most cynical person or like, I have to do this to keep my job, it's because the people care. And you have to recognize that under the system. By the way, that number we were talking about, the 188, may or may not include the current number of 41,449 of these contractor deaths. Not just Wagner, but anybody that they brought in. So it may be as high as 220, 216 or something like that, depending on what number you're looking at. Just an enormous friggin' number. And by the way, the other thing I was going to mention about declaring the Wagner Group an international criminal organization is that it allows the FBI and its links to Interpol to do a lot of overseas work as well in helping them investigate the money flow in and out of Wagner. And part of Wagner's
and we can also seize assets. We can seize assets now.
Exactly.
There's a whole bunch of stuff that we can do now. Yeah.
Right. And it doesn't have to be an act of military the way a terrorism thing would go, because it's just simply, it's like money laundering or human trafficking or drugs.
The guy who runs it, Prigozhin, is a real oof.
Yeah. Yeah. He's just he's
exactly
the worst of the worst.
I mean, Prigozhin's a nasty piece of work. He's a real nasty piece of work.
I agree, Flora.
But
Flora hates him too. She wanted to pipe in. He's basically Jeffrey Dahmer with a career track.
She's not a big fan of Prigozhin either.
Yeah.
I mean, when I drove out last week to Donbass and drove back, it's about a 10-hour drive. It tells you how big this country is. It's about a 10-hour drive between Kiev and Donbass. And so we had a lot of time to talk, my colleague and I, who I kind of share costs with. And we set up kind of a professional partnership. I'll buy gas this time, you buy it next time.
Right.
And so we had a lot of time to talk. That's 20 hours in the car together. And one of the things we talked about was there's a growing concern by many who are Russia watchers that there are about 4 different armed groups now within Russia that may contend for control. There is the Wagner group.
Right.
There are the Chechens under Kadyrov, so the Kadyrov fighters.
Sure. He thinks that's a holy war. He even said so this week. Yeah.
Who thinks it's a holy war? Yeah. Well, we'll talk about that. I'd like to talk about that in a second. Then there's the police and kind of regional militias. When I say militias, I mean like There is a paramilitary police force internally within Russia. They kind of control little towns and villages, and they have their own regions. That's a third armed group. And then, of course, there's the actual army. The problem with that is when you start diversifying control of a bunch of armed men, it is entirely possible, if the center cannot hold the center of gravity, if the Kremlin can't keep the center of gravity, those guys might start shooting at one another. And I, I have said all along that I fear that the real crisis is not this war, but what happens when Russia loses it as roundly as I think they're about to.
Right.
So, but what was the other thing you brought up that I wanted to talk about briefly about? Oh, the Holy War thing. Yeah.
Yes.
The Holy War thing. The Chechens are increasingly turning this into what they call a holy war. Not that the Orthodox Russian Church isn't doing the same thing, but our good friend Solovyev, the head propagandist for the Kremlin, was out on the front lines with a bunch of Chechen units, shouting Allahu Akbar. So not that. Look, I mean, that's par for the course if you're a Muslim soldier or a fighter. But for Solovyev to be doing that is to me pretty disingenuous and kind of he's such a basically white Christian nationalist.
He's a bigot.
He's a bigot.
Yeah.
Right. So and
that's the nicest thing you can say about him.
Shouting Allah. Yeah, really.
By the way, Rep. Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert and all these, not one more dime to Ukraine. There will be a point, whether it's in the next 6 weeks or so or 2 months from now, as things start, continuing here, that video will start coming out and people like me will continue to post shots of, the Wagner Group mercs that have Nazi symbols on them proudly, and the Allah Akbar yelling from them, that this is the side that they're putting their lot in with, as far as the Republicans, that the Freedom Caucus right now, that's there. And the irony of it is, it can't be lost on anyone at this point. It's absurd that, we go back to the Reagan Republicans must be free, would be spinning in their graves, much less the Republicans that were dealing with post 9/11, never forget and all this stuff, because these are the same people who will gladly post those kind of images every 9/11 for weeks on either side.
Let's dip our bullets in pig fat.
Well, right.
Bad
exactly. That same crowd is, that same dude is cheering on, and that, by the way, is part of the whole, the Chechens, and are the same people, by the way, that are cooking bacon on their rifles. Whenever you see that cooking bacon on a rifle barrel, that's what that's related to. That's the PG-13 version of that, by the way, just to be clear. Let's see. We got time for one more question before the break, because the show's zipping by.
I've got a question here from LMAC 1969. When is the lack of soldiers going to really be a big problem for the Russians?
When are they going to run out of soldiers? Not for a while. That is one thing that they have. They have a lot of people. And this is historic as well. I mean, if you go back in the history of Russian warfare, this is what they build their military doctrine on. They literally build their military doctrine on, we're going to have a bunch of cannons, we're going to hit the other side, and then we're just going to throw people at them. They did it as far back as the Napoleonic Wars. They did it, they did in the they didn't do it in the Russo-Japanese War, because that was mostly naval. But, they did it in the Crimean War. They did it in Napoleonic War. They did it in World War I, and they did it in World War II. The myth of the great Soviet victories during the Second World War are mostly told by the Russians themselves. So there was a lot of dysfunction during that war. They're not good war fighters. The Russians, but despite what they would have you believe, they are not good war fighters. Because they don't train their people. They don't have proper discipline. Their doctrine is very heavy on just throwing numbers at the enemy. So that's what they're going to do. They're going to keep throwing men. I was going to say young men, but it's increasingly now that's guys in their 40s are now being called up. Guys who even guys who fought in Afghanistan, I suspect at some point will be called upon to show up. They're not going to run out of men to put in uniform, train for a couple of weeks, give an AK-47, or train them on how to fire off a Grad missile system, and then they're going to throw them at the front. And if they die, well, we got more people out in Siberia that we can grab. So it's
by the way,
it's
some people were asking about my figures about the drop in Chinese population and the 300,000 number. Part of that is extrapolated from this, which is and this is just one example. But this is 3 counties in Tianjin, Tongjiang, Nanjiang, and Pingjiang. And they all experienced in 1 year a 22, a 30, and a 17% drop in population. This is not normal. This is not people moving out. This isn't teenagers and college kids leaving to move to the big city. It's unnecessary in that part of the country. And this is indicative now, because the thing is, the Chinese government, the CCP, has been able to like tamp down the bad news for a long time. The problem is the regional governors have to tell the truth, and they post it in such a way that you can actually look. Now they started taking that stuff down because they realize people are doing the math now. But when that in and of itself, that is a drop of 300,000 people just among 3 small counties in China, not even big counties. And this is indicative of a wave that went across. That's where the 300 million number comes from. And it makes sense, by the way, why you would have a zero COVID full lockdown. If you were having something like that happening, where you were dropping 10, 15, 20% of your population in every county, then you would absolutely have a draconian zero COVID lockdown with walls and soldiers and people in hazmat suits. That's how, and you would be disinfecting every building. That's how you would react if you had that many dead. If you had 4,000 dead in a country of 1.4 billion, you'd shrug it off like it was a bad flu. You wouldn't even notice statistically. That's why hence the distrust, but also that's the root of that new calculation that's coming out. So I wanted to let people know that I was just plucking that number out of the air or buying it credulously off of, some YouTube video I saw. I went back and looked, and you can track those numbers, and they're on those websites, and it is terrifying, the number of deaths that they're just shrugging off. And it's not normal. It is, again, it's beyond. Yep, autocracies, right. They have the ability to hide that.
Autocracies are able to do.
That's right. Let's take a break, and we'll come back with more of your questions.
Sure.
And it's the House Sparks Radio program, Mega Worldwide.
You are happy, let us be happy together, whether the weather is cloudy or sunny. I will always be your funny honey bunny. I am lucky, you are lucky, let us get lucky together, whether the weather is cloudy or breezy. I'll be there to say, hey, come on, let's take it easy. 'Cause isn't it nice to have the friends that you do? And isn't it nice that the sky is so blue? And isn't it nice to say I love you, chugga chugga choo choo, woo woo. I am smiling, you are smiling, let us smile together, whether the weather is cloudy or stormy. I will still be there in the morning, I'll be right by your side in the morning. I'll make you breakfast in the morning, I hope that you like cereal.
Yay! Well, welcome back to the show. Yay! Welcome back. Yes. There's Flora. That's a happy ending in and of itself. By the way, we've got 2 foster kittens that are currently getting snipped as we speak. They're being broken as we speak. And by the way, I use the phrase broken because you don't fix something that works. I'm just saying they make it unwork, and therefore the kittens are being broken today. Stop saying that. It bugs me. Now, obviously lots going on, and part of the we were discussing this during the break, that there is a lot of flack being thrown Germany's way, and part of it, and you were mentioning that Schultz is kind of an old school East German pro USSR kind of a dude. Is that what part of this might come from? You think,
a red brigade, kind of militant leftist, anti-American. At least that's what he was back in the 80s. That's
Sure.
where when he came out on the scene.
Right.
I don't know. I really don't.
It's like
know
a Jeremy
what Germany is
Corbyn
thinking.
or a, he's their Jeremy Corbyn or our Bernie Sanders to some degree, where there's this kind of like pining for it, like the myth. If it had only had a couple more years, they were so close to actually being great. And then it was undermined by bloody capitalism. And if we leave it alone long enough, the USSR will reconstitute itself and become a socialist utopia like it was headed towards. There does seem to be a weird that, and I hear that when people refer to being against Russia in its current form as red baiting or as a new red scare, when really that was about creeping socialism. More so, had everything to do with the red flag of China as well. Communism as a political front in the world. Russia's no longer red in that respect. Hasn't been for a long time. Arguably, wasn't even near the end. It was just a mix of over the table and under the table, crony capitalism.
Yeah, it was more like a criminal state. Well, it was a criminal state at the end of the Soviet Union. Which is probably one of the reasons why Putin was so successful in creating the modern kleptocracy.
Right. It's the perfect fish tank for him.
Yeah, there's also concern. I have heard. Look, many people are analyzing why Germany is doing what it is doing currently.
Right.
And there are some who are saying, there's a historical problem here, and the idea of Germany and Russia fighting one another and Germans killing, German-made weapons killing Russians, evokes some really bad moments in history. I have heard that argument. I don't agree with that argument.
Right.
But something is going on in Germany where it comes to, like when this whole war started, everybody was like, we'll send anti-tank weapons. We'll send this. Germany said, we'll send you 5,000 helmets.
Right.
It was completely. They gave these anti-aircraft systems, the Gepard it starts with a G, but they had to give they had to be dragged kicking and screaming to give anti-aircraft weapon systems. Germany has been very, very slow to support Ukraine, and there's growing resentment here towards Germany because of it.
Right.
So, we'll see what happens with these leopards. Hopefully either the people who have stockpiles will say we're not going to listen to Berlin, and then what does Berlin do? Putin would love to see a divide grow within the Western Alliance.
Sure. You see that all over Twitter, by the way. I don't either. People are taking Germany dragging its feet as division amongst NATO and the Allies, which is not the case at all. Everybody but Germany is on board with a lot of these decisions. It's a little goofy. Yeah. Germany's new defense minister,
Hungary, but yeah,
right. Pistorius, in his first TV interview as the new defense minister, said, and I quote, "I'm not an expert on military strategy. I'm the defense minister." And that in and of itself,
how does that work?
That literally, that's a direct quote. That's obviously translated from German, where I'm sure it was even funnier. Where somebody saying that with a German accent would be like something you would hear, I think, in Dr. Strangelove. But that was a direct quote from Pistorius in this regard. And the issue with Germany is not that they aren't giving stuff, because whatever. They could drag their feet away, but they're trying to deny other countries the ability to give that stuff out. Even though Germany hands their gear out to other countries doing arguably bad things in Africa, the Middle East, wherever, that they seem to not even. I don't know. There's never even a hair split about that. But in the case of Ukraine, it's specific. And I think ultimately, you and I've discussed this many times, that the basis of that entire thing is that Ukraine, once it's stable and is allowed to thrive, will be the biggest economic power. Yeah, it'll be a huge competitor to Germany. and Germany's sort of control over the reins of the EU as a monetary function, especially through Deutsche Bank, which again I've said is the Mos Eisley of world finance, their ability to control economics, both good and bad, through their coffers, is one of the reasons why that scares them. Because
I have concerns that that's the case.
Yeah,
I have very grave concerns that that's the case, and I just have general concerns over old rivalries and old agendas on the European continent being played out here in Ukraine. I mean, you could argue that the Brits are being as supportive as they are because they love having a spoiler on the European continent.
Yeah,
trying to keep the Europeans going at one another. So
them siding with Ukraine
could be because they want to drive a wedge between the European continents. Cynically, you could say that. I mean, the French have their interests, the Germans have theirs. The EU is comparatively a very new development, and while so far during this war it's brought them in many ways closer together. Europe is a very disharmonious place. And due in no small part to the
scars of being a split country.
Who controls the isthmus between the Adriatic and the Black Sea? If you can remove this as a tension point on the European continent, it's going to go a long way towards long-standing peace in Europe. Which, right now we kind of take for granted, but remember there's centuries of conflict on this continent because everybody lives together and nobody really likes one another.
Right.
I mean, people will fight on, if you live on the other side of a river, it used to be that they would, that was good enough reason to go fight one another. That's the history of Europe.
It's also the history of Africa, South America. It's also Southeast Asia.
Density, no.
Yeah.
True, but because of the density of the population on this continent in particular, people are just chomping at the bit to go at their neighbor, and that's what Putin is. That's what Putin is hoping for.
Yes,
he is hoping. He is hoping that there will be disharmony within the European Union, within the Allies, within the transatlantic alliance. If there's some good news to have come out of the Ramstein conference, it's that it looks like the alliance is standing strong and standing together.
And even still, by the way, even in Germany holding back,
they did agree to send.
Yeah,
they did agree to send an awful lot of weaponry after Ramstein.
Yeah,
they didn't get the leopards, but they got a big package of weaponry.
Yeah, Germany seems to be, for the sake of whatever the future is, sending as much defensive stuff. Again, this is like an exaggeration of the helmet strategy, but they're sending Iris-T anti-aircraft stuff, that infrared anti-aircraft stuff that's been very successful. They have 100% rate being used in Ukraine right now. Whatever they aim at, they shoot down. That's not a small thing. They added another $1 billion package on top of it. The Leopard part dragging their heels is basically their fear that they're going to be part of that German tanks, are going to be used in Russian propaganda against against Germany after the fact amongst the people, whether it falls or not.
And because of their history, obviously, they're reluctant about being seen as an aggressor or belligerent. They don't want to be seen as a warmonger. They don't want to be seen as escalating the thing. But what everybody else is saying, primarily the Ukrainians, but the Poles, the Brits, all the people who are really supporting Ukraine against Russia, is this is going to escalate no matter what. This is going to escalate. It's probably going to escalate this year significantly. We're damned if we do, we're damned if we don't. At the end of the day, you have to pick a side, and once you pick that side, you've got to support it. And if you're not going to defend Ukraine against Russia, then either lead or get out of the way.
Right. And by the way, the members of we're done, but the members of the German Parliament are criticizing Schultz about this particularly. Strack Zimmerman, one of the Defense Committee chairs, is saying history's looking at us, and Germany has unfortunately just failed. At the very least, it'd be right to give our partners, mainly Poland, a green light, and they're going to stick to that. That's going to move, I'd say, in the next week.
Yeah, God forbid the casualties, skyrocket in Ukraine, and that's going to be,
on Germany's head.
People are going to be pointing the finger at Schultz in Berlin. So
that's right.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much. Thanks, everybody. I got to stop talking because I got to sing it tonight. Nerd Halen at the M, and then Tuesday, Nerd Halen at the Yamava. Thank you. Yeah, we got 2 big gigs tonight and on Tuesday.
Enjoy.
So, yeah, it's going to be a good time. Thanks again, Philip Ittner. Thanks, Chicago. Right. Thanks, Johnny Million.
We'll
Thank you, chat room. See you soon. Okay.
Love you guys.
Bye-bye.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.